Hi, I'm Heidi Otway, your host for this Conversations on Cannabis virtual forum, brought to you by the Medical Marijuana Education and Research Initiative at Florida A&M University. In this conversation, we're talking about the consequences of using cannabis illegally in the state of Florida. Let's meet the guests for today's show. Chief Ron O'Brien is a law enforcement veteran who's worked as a patrol officer and on the narcotics unit at the Leon County Sheriff's Office in North Florida. Chief, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you for having me. Well, as you mentioned, I'm a member of the Leon County Sheriff's Office. I've been here for 24 years, and some of my relevant experience to this conversation, as you mentioned, are approximately 10 total years assigned to uniform patrol as a deputy, a sergeant, and a lieutenant, and approximately 7 years of experience assigned to our narcotics unit as a detective, sergeant, and now as the chief overall of investigations and special operations.
Well, thank you for being our guest today. And our other guest is BB Bell, the owner of BB's Bail Bonds in the Tampa Bay area, and she works across the state. Miss BB, welcome to the show. Tell us about yourself.
Thank you. Thank you. Hi, I am BB, owner of BB's Bail Bonds. Been in the criminal justice system now about 15 years, mainly in the bail bond industry for the last 12 years.
Okay,
So
well, thank
basically
you.
trying to serve the community.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you both for being our guests today. And to everyone joining us on this live forum, please share, post, and tag a friend on Facebook to have them join this conversation. If you're watching on YouTube, share the link so others can join us as well. During the forum, we want you to send us your questions in the comment box, and we'll do our best to have our guests answer them. We also want you to tell us what you think about this forum by completing the survey that will be posted in the comments on YouTube and Facebook after the live program. Your name will be entered into a drawing on March 10th, 2022 to win a $100 gift card provided by one of Mary's partners. So let's dive into this conversation about cannabis. So Chief, I'm going to start with you. What are the laws in Florida? And let's talk about medical marijuana use first. So what are the laws for legal medical marijuana use in Florida?
Okay, so for legal medical marijuana use, and first I would say that I would like to instruct our viewers if they're interested in medical marijuana, they can go to the website for the Office of Medical Marijuana Use, which is knowthefactsmmj.com. Once again, knowthefactsmmj.com. And what it'll show you on that website is the steps that you need to go through in order to be prescribed medical marijuana. And of course, the first step would be to see a qualified physician that has the ability within the state of Florida to prescribe medical marijuana. And then once you're prescribed medical marijuana, and it could be of various forms, edibles, oils, smokable, and then you would fill that prescription at a medical marijuana treatment center. So that's where you would need to pick up your prescription. And then, of course, there are some other rules about, where you can use or take your medicine. For instance, if you're prescribed smokable marijuana, you cannot use that in a public place or on a bus or things like that, where other people would be subject to secondhand smoke and what have you. But that's a great website, and it's got a lot of good resources.
Okay. What about recreational adult use of marijuana that's actually brought on the street? What are the laws there? Ms. BB, you want to take that one? Or Chief?
Yeah, I can take that one. Many users of marijuana think that because if they have a medical pass, first of all, they think that it's okay to purchase off the streets and use because I have a medical marijuana pass. Unfortunately, that's not true. Again, you must have a medical marijuana pass to engage in the use of marijuana. And of course, as previously stated, you cannot just smoke it anywhere at any time and be in possession of it anywhere at any time. There are rules and regulations that tell you when and where you can smoke medical marijuana.
Chief, you want to add to that?
Sure. What I will say when we just talked about recreational use of marijuana, very simply, Florida law does not allow for recreational use or cultivation of marijuana. You can't grow your own, and you can't buy it off the street. medical marijuana must be obtained through the Medical Marijuana Treatment Center. If you don't have a prescription and you didn't get it at that place, it's illegal.
Very well said. So Florida allowed medical marijuana use in 2016, and 3 years later, there was a sharp decline in arrests. Chief, what caused that?
Well, we had some legislative changes. On July 1st, 2019, Senate Bill 7020 was signed into law, which removed hemp from the list of controlled substances. So because hemp and cannabis are both derived from the same plant, the cannabis sativa plant, the field test kits that law enforcement were using at the time were unable to differentiate between the two because, both contain some level of THC, but hemp is very low level THC. So the test kits we had at the time, were unable to tell which one was which. So as a result, the number of arrests that we were making for illegal cannabis at the time declined.
Mm-hmm. And Ms. Beebe, you encounter people who may have been arrested. What do they say to you if they've been arrested for cannabis possession?
The main thing they say is is they don't feel like they should be going to jail, especially those who have personal use, less than 20 grams. They feel like they should be entitled to smoke it, especially if they're on their own property or at home. They feel like they're entitled to smoke it. And many of them also indicate that they were unable to obtain a medical pass, but do need marijuana because it does help them medically for pain and other things and focus on those things. So I get a variety of complaints about being arrested. Some think they should have never gotten pulled over and thus have marijuana on them. So there's a variety of complaints there because it really does, when you're arrested for it, it really does throw their lives into a spiral for just a small amount of marijuana.
Do you encounter people who actually had a legal medical marijuana card that was issued to them in the state of Florida?
I do. And basically, many of them, I would say well over, say 95% of them, were pulled over and you could smell the marijuana. They were smoking and driving, and you could smell the marijuana when the officer approached the vehicle. And they stated, hey, I have a medical pass. So they didn't think that there was an issue with them being able to carry their marijuana and smoke it. But of course, we now know, and they now know, is you cannot smoke it because it is controlled, American marijuana, and you are unable to operate a vehicle, just as if you were prescribed a medical script for a pain pill, something of that nature. You cannot drive heavy equipment or operate heavy equipment while under medication. So yes, it impairs you, and basically you're a risk now to injure other people, if not kill, while you're driving in high. So it's just not something that they're gonna ever get away with in court. Education, and I preach this all the time. They must educate themselves. They being those who have medical marijuana passes must educate themselves as to when and when they cannot smoke or possess their legal medical marijuana.
Chief, you want to add to that?
No, it's a good point about the education. Ignorance of the law is not a defense in court. You can't just say, I didn't know. So that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation today. And hopefully we'll be able to help a lot of people out with the information that we're going to discuss.
So, Chief, can you tell me, how can law enforcement tell if marijuana is the legal version of medical cannabis or the illegal street marijuana? Ms. Beebe just kind of referenced that they both smell alike if someone is smoking it in the car. How do you tell them?
Okay, so there's several ways to tell if marijuana is legal or illegal. Medical marijuana by law must not contain THC or the tetrahydrocannabinol levels, which is the actual controlled substance. It's what gives marijuana the effect, right? So it can't have a THC content above 0.3%. So the new field test kits that I were talking to you about can determine the levels of THC in the suspected marijuana. So it'll, if it tests at 1% or higher, then it'll give a response that this is above the level of medical marijuana. Mm-hmm. So that's the first indicator that it's illegal. The person in possession of the marijuana has to have a medical marijuana card, and they have to be listed as a patient or a caregiver in the medical marijuana use registry. So that's a database that we can go to and look that person up to see if they're a registered person that has been issued a medical marijuana card and has a prescription from a doctor. So if they're not in there, it's probably illegal.
Very straightforward.
Right. The registry also contains information as to what kind of medical marijuana the patient or caregiver is prescribed. Like I mentioned about the edibles and oils and smokable marijuana. So if you're prescribed edibles and you have marijuana in your possession that's in a smokable form, it's illegal, mm-hmm. right? Because you weren't prescribed that form. So law enforcement officers will confirm that the amount of the marijuana possessed by the person also corresponds with the amount dispensed from the medical marijuana treatment center, because it's just like going to Walgreens, right? But it's a medical marijuana treatment center. That's where you have to get your marijuana. Mm-hmm. So if you're prescribed a certain amount and you have well in excess of that amount, it might be illegal, right? So, and it also has to be packaged correctly with the label on it, and the label has to match the patient information, just like if you were picking up a prescription at Walgreens. And there's, the law dictates what the label and the packaging has to look like. Patients or caregivers cannot possess more than 4 ounces of medical marijuana in a smoking form at any time. So, if you have an excess of 4 ounces in your possession, that's probably illegal. So those are all the things that we can do to check and see, if you're in possession of medical marijuana or mm-hmm. marijuana.
So we talked a lot about, that using smokable cannabis, whether it's the recreational, which is illegal, or the medical version, which is legal in Florida if you have a medical marijuana use card and you're registered. But how do you know if someone is driving under the influence of cannabis? What are the signs? What do you look for? What does law enforcement look for?
Okay, so there's a lot of things that would be indicators. Some things might be driving too slowly or even in excess of the speed limit. Maybe sitting at a red light through a green cycle. Failure to maintain a single lane or weaving, swerving, mm-hmm. Failing to turn on your headlights at night. All of these things are just, some indicators that would catch a law enforcement officer's attention and want to investigate that driving pattern.
Yeah. And what are the consequences if someone is caught driving while high?
Well, the consequences would be the same as a DUI. Mm-hmm. The medical use law does not exempt a person from prosecution for a criminal offense or a DUI related to impairment or intoxication resulting from the medical use of marijuana. So, as Bibi mentioned earlier, it's if you're impaired and you're unable to safely drive a vehicle, it would be the same for alcohol or marijuana, or if you took too many painkillers, like Bibi said, mm-hmm. It would still be considered driving under the influence.
Yeah. So, Ms. Bibi, what happens when you get a phone call from someone who's been arrested for being under the influence of cannabis? If they've been driving?
Generally, the call would more than likely initially come from a relative who
a relative
contacted me about bonding out a loved one. And sometimes we'll get those calls from jail as well. Mm-hmm. But the main thing with the person that's been arrested is they were not aware that, again, education is key. They were not aware that they could not drive or do certain things with their medical marijuana. So the biggest thing with them is they get upset because now they feel like their entire life has been changed. An arrest for drugs, whether it's a small amount or whether it's a major amount, changes your life. As far as employment goes, although many are misdemeanors for having personal possession, it changes your life. Most lose their jobs because they have gone to jail and missed work. So there are a lot of consequences there. And the biggest thing with them is I didn't know they could arrest me for driving while being high.
Right.
So
With their medical cannabis, more
yeah,
often than not, right?
medical or not. And
Yeah.
again, it's just a major thing of education. We're going to have to do a better job of educating people about this issue, even when they're giving marketing material, when they go to get the medical pass at the treatment centers and facilities. Of course, as mentioned prior, many are not going to read it. It's a lot. And they just feel like, hey, I got this medical pass now and I can do what I want to do.
Right.
So
Yeah.
when the arrest happens, of course, many are surprised that they got arrested for being high because they didn't know even prior to medical marijuana. Many didn't know that they could get arrested for being high. They only thought they could get arrested for driving under the influence for alcohol.
Right.
So that's what most people equate driving under the influence with: alcohol, not being high and other things.
Yeah. Well, I think, you all both said it very clearly. That's the reason why we're having this program, is so that we can have conversations on cannabis and discuss these issues, because we want more people to know what the laws are in Florida and what the consequences are if they're caught doing something that breaks the law. We actually have a question that's related to this portion of our conversation. It's from Kim Wallace, who had a question for you all. It would be considered, would it be considered a DUI if you are driving, which you all have already answered. And the question is, if I'm a passenger and an MMJ patient, am I able to smoke in the car if I'm not the driver? Chief, you want to take that one?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I would have to do a little bit of research on that, as far as where you can use your smokable marijuana and everything like that. Just knowing what I've read about, like I mentioned, not in a public place, on a bus, or things like that. I don't have a solid answer for you right this second. I haven't read that anywhere. Haven't read any case briefs that have come from that. My inclination would be that it's not a good idea, because number one, even if I said, oh yeah, you're good within the law to do that, which I'm not saying that, but hot box in the car to where the driver is getting secondhand smoke, and they don't have a medical use card, and if you get pulled over, then if we're talking about arrests and things like that, you could be subject to have your vehicle searched. So it's never a good idea to use marijuana in your vehicle, whether you're a passenger or not.
Miss BB, you want to weigh in on that?
Just a tad bit. I actually had a situation where I bonded someone out. This was maybe last October, November. They were, in fact, the passenger. Had a medical marijuana card, and they were actually, now here's the thing, I don't know if they had a card for the loose cannabis, or if they had a card for edibles. Not really sure. I do know that they were arrested because they were in possession of cannabis, even though it was medical marijuana, in that vehicle, and they were a passenger.
Was it the smokable version, or was it an edible?
Was not. I'm not sure if it was smokable or not. That's
Really?
my only thing. One of my agents did the bond, but I'm not sure if it was smokable or not. But I thought it was pretty interesting that they were the passenger, and basically, now here's the thing. Not actually sure if they were actually smoking it, but we do know that they were in possession of it. Now,
Did they have a card? They had a medical marijuana
They had a
card?
card, but here's the kicker. It smelled like marijuana in the vehicle. So not sure who was smoking. Could have been the driver that didn't have one. Um, I'm not sure who was smoking, but I do know that the person did have a medical pass. It was in their possession, and they're the ones who admitted to the police officers before they asked them to step out of the vehicle to search the car once they smelled the medical marijuana. Well, not medical, once they smelled marijuana. Just not sure. The case is actually still going on, just not certain who had it, who was smoking it. Maybe they smoked prior to getting in the car. Not sure. But the passenger did have possession of marijuana.
Okay, Kim. Well, I hope that answered your question, and you'll take what they said for thought in your situation.
Great question. Yeah, great question.
So, Florida is a state that doesn't allow for recreational use of cannabis, or the street cannabis, but we do have some states that do allow for recreational cannabis. And I've read some stories about how they had to enact laws to help identify when someone is driving high. And so, Chief, I have a question for you about Florida. Here in Florida, where we do allow legal smokable cannabis, which we've just talked about, how do you do a sobriety test to see if someone has had too much cannabis in their system? If you notice that they're, you mentioned the so-called driving behaviors that may, warrant them being pulled over. What does a sobriety test look like if you don't smell cannabis, but their behaviors suggest otherwise?
Right. So, we haven't done anything different on this. This the same thing that we've been doing for years and years and years. But most agencies have some people that are trained drug recognition experts, and there are certain sobriety tests or things that they can look for to determine what type of substance you're under the influence of. And some of the indicators, like let's say for alcohol, and you've seen the shows where they have like a pen or something and you follow it with your eyes, right? Some of your body's physical responses can't be faked or they can't be tricked, right? So when you have too much alcohol in your system, your eyes don't track smoothly. They're kind of jumpy. And then when you're looking to the side, when it'll twitch, it'll jump, and they call it nystagmus, right? And then for other drugs, you may not be able to converge your eyes or look at the tip of your nose, right? So different drugs have different effects on your body, and some of those things are what the officer or deputy can do to look at to see how your body's reacting, and they can determine what substance you're under the influence of. Excuse me.
Wow. Really interesting. So both of you all, have experience with individuals who may be in possession of cannabis, narcotics, and other illegal substances. Are you all seeing a drop in arrests when it comes to cannabis possession in Florida?
I can speak, locally here in the Tallahassee, Leon County area, that there was a decrease in arrests, like we talked about after hemp was excluded from controlled substances, and the field test kits. But since that time, new technology has been developed, and now those test kits are available to determine the level of THC. And like we also said, that marijuana is illegal in the state of Florida, whether it's for recreational use or self-medication or not. You can't grow it, and you can't sell it, and you can't smoke it unless it's prescribed by a doctor. So with that new technology and those new test kits, it's probably going to end up going back to the levels that you saw previous, to the new law change.
Really? Okay. Ms. Beebe, what are you?
Yeah, I know in Hillsborough County, we've seen a decrease in bonding out people who have charges just for, say, marijuana. If it's, less than 20 grams, they'll generally, if they have no other charges with that stop or they have no past and felonies or whatnot, they'll issue a citation. The officer will issue them a citation to appear in court, as opposed to putting an arrest on their record, which I think is awesome. Although it affects our bottom line, I think it's awesome because, again, that's one less thing on their record that would prevent them from future jobs. Illegal or not, a lot of companies just don't want their employees engaging in marijuana. So yeah, we've seen a drop in people going to jail just for that one single charge. So yes, we've seen definitely a reduction.
Okay. So let's shift gears and let's talk about, just crime in general. And a lot of times in many communities, we do see that cannabis is related to violent crimes. And I'm curious to know from your perspective, if you think there's a nexus between cannabis use or cannabis possession and violent crimes. Any thoughts on that?
Was that for me or for BB? I'm sorry.
I'm gonna start with you, Chief.
Okay.
Or I can go with BB, whichever.
No, I'll be glad to take it. The interesting thing is, on its surface, when you're talking about marijuana, people want to think like that violent crime wouldn't be related to marijuana. I just sit here and eat potato chips and watch my TV when I smoke marijuana or whatever. But the fact of the matter is that there is a nexus between violent crime and marijuana, at least here in Leon County, and it's because of the money, not the drug itself, but the money that the amounts of drugs represent. So, a drug deal that's gone bad, or somebody wants to rip somebody off because they have a lot of marijuana or money from the sales of marijuana and what have you. That type of illegal behavior. And when you mess with someone's money, they get mad. If you make them mad enough, you might get shot over it. And that's what we're seeing. So it's not necessarily violent crime that occurs while people are under the influence of marijuana. It's violent crime that is because of the sale and the money that it produces and generates.
Miss BB, you want to weigh in on that? Yeah, sure. And definitely, just to expand, it is about the money. It's the number one seller in many communities, along with other drugs, of course. However, the marijuana definitely is about the money. Crime and marijuana go hand in hand. We know this. But again, it's almost a cult. It's a culture. People are actually going to continue to partake in it. There are those who would much rather have the street marijuana as opposed to medical marijuana because they feel like they get more out of it in terms of these days, the different things that is being put into marijuana, the street marijuana. So it is definitely a huge issue. And again, it's about the money. It's about the high. They feel like they get much higher off of street marijuana as opposed to medical. Some people feel like, they've tried it from people that have it. They feel like it just pretty much puts
and that's illegal. Just FYI, it's illegal to try someone else's medical marijuana.
Exactly.
They have to throw that out there.
They do it. I mean, on the criminal side, you have people that are getting legal marijuana passes just to get it and give it to people who can't get the pass. That's going on quite often as well.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. So if Florida were to make street or recreational cannabis legal in the state, do you all think that violent crimes would continue?
Just to piggyback on what Baby was saying, I believe that violent crime would continue if marijuana was just legalized for regular, like street marijuana was legalized. As long as if the state or the legislation puts a limit on the THC levels, then like BB was saying, some folks are really smart and they've come up with engineered some good strains of cannabis, and the THC content is much higher for street level marijuana. So you know, what BB was saying was it's like gasoline, right? You could have your low grade and your high grade, or you
Pretty
can have
much.
a light beer or a whiskey shot, but you know, they're both alcohol or they're both gasoline. Just one is more powerful than the other. And so,
Right.
you know, if there's any limitation placed on the THC content that the legislation would allow, then there will be a market for that higher grade marijuana.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And to go further, and to be quite honest, I believe it would increase violent crimes. And I'm going to tell you why. Everyone's going to start trying to sell it. It's legal. Everyone's going to start trying to sell it. So they think that they could sell it to the people in the streets. That's going to be their mindset because it's legal. So you're going to have people who have never been in the sale of drugs or narcotics or any form of drug gonna start selling weed because they marijuana because they feel like they can, and they're gonna have the customer base. Just think about it. Every community is gonna have someone or several someones selling marijuana because hey, I can walk around with it legally now. So, and again, it's going to give more exposure to it in the neighborhoods, and it's going to increase in terms of the number of people, in my assessment, that's going to actually want to sell and buy. Right now, the law by the citizens will not partake in it because they don't want to get arrested and go to jail. But now that if it becomes if it becomes legal, you're going to have more users. You're going to have more users. And I don't think the medical marijuana facilities, treatment facilities, would be able to handle all those users. So it's going to. I think things are going to get worse before it get better in that regard.
That left me completely speechless, Ms.
Yeah,
BP, the
yeah.
thought of that. Um,
Get ready.
so, yeah, there is a lot of talk about making it legal in Florida, so we'll see how that goes. So let's kind of shift gears and look at some of the data when it comes to drug arrests for cannabis. And we know that the FBI data shows that 92% of arrests for cannabis are 92% of drug arrests are for possession of cannabis. And the majority of the people that are arrested are people of color. So Ms. BB, in your line of work, you know, where you deal with a lot of people of color who are been arrested. Why do you think that is?
Exposure. Um, most of the people I deal with are, of course, from the inner city. And when I say exposure, I mean exposure in that particular neighborhood because it's the culture of that neighborhood. Everything is done hanging out at the corner store, hanging out on the corner. Certain corners are just hot spots where you hang out. And everything is done there in the community, from barbecuing to buying and selling cannabis, you name it, is done on the corner. So there's this huge exposure to law enforcement who patrol those areas. They're going to always see people either walking around smoking or maybe even witnessing a buying and sale on the corner. Because again, we have a very high exposure to law enforcement in the community. Now, granted, sometimes there are issues where, okay, this person may have been arrested in the past. So when the police see them, that's their area, they're going to approach them, assuming that they're in possession of marijuana. So not only do you have the exposure, we don't have in the inner city the best relationship with law enforcement. And I believe that will get better eventually. However, the biggest thing is the exposures there. I mean, that's just how it is in the inner city. It's a culture. You hang out, you socialize, you smoke, and the exposure is there.
Chief.
Well, you know, this is a large scale and very complex issue that does need attention. I've taken college classes on drugs and crime, and we've had a whole semester's worth of conversation surrounding this exact issue. there are studies that are being conducted to try to figure out why things are the way they are. And like I said, it's very complex, and there's no one specific answer to put an end to disparity. Some of the conversations that we've had included, what leads people to use drugs in the first place. If we could stop that, then we could stop the rest of it. But and then some of what Bibi was saying, law enforcement agencies will staff their patrol people or what have you in areas where perhaps they get more calls for volume or more calls for service, or there's higher incidence of crime. So then those cops are driving around in those neighborhoods, and then, like Bibi was saying, some street level crime or maybe open air drug markets, hand to hand drug transactions. People smoking marijuana outside in a public space, like we said, was illegal. A patrol officer or patrol deputy driving by can observe these types of things, these street level type crimes. And then, often that leads into investigation and enforcement action. Traffic stops, we talked about traffic stops. If I feel like, and I haven't done the studies or numbers, but I would imagine that a large percentage of drug arrests are the product of traffic stops, because you're either smoking in the car, you're transporting it in the car, things like that. Some of the other topics we talked about were the criminal justice system and the sentencing laws, such as minimum mandatory sentencing, and then just the existing laws as they are. If there's enough support by the people to change the existing laws, then maybe that's the direction that people should go, to contact their legislators to push for legislative change. Because at the end of the day, what we discussed was that certain things are illegal, and it is law enforcement's job to enforce the existing laws, right? We don't create the laws, we just enforce the laws. So if society is unhappy with the laws as they exist, then maybe that's the avenue to go to try to change that. Because if it's not illegal, law enforcement doesn't enforce it, right? So, but what we can do to change this is initiatives like this, education, so that people know what is illegal and how they can avoid those behaviors. We can avoid arrest if we avoid illegal behavior. And so, some of that might be an education piece, because they were unaware that what they were doing was illegal and could potentially end up in an arrest and on their record. And then, another thing to change it, like we said, do a deep dive into, why things are the way they are, how our society and the criminal justice system works, to figure out what we can do to change some of that, systemic stuff. And I talked about contacting your legislators and even within the sheriff's office here. I mean, we do, some training on, procedural justice and community-oriented policing and, implicit bias training and things like that, so that, even our deputies are more aware of some of these issues going on. So, like we said, it's a very large and complex issue that, unfortunately, I don't have the answer to end it today, but it does get a lot of thought and a lot of attention. I can tell you that.
Yeah, well, we're also seeing state attorneys in counties across the state saying that, we're not going to prosecute for certain arrests related to cannabis. What are you all seeing in your communities regarding that?
I'm certainly seeing, I think over the course of the past 12 months, an uptick in state prosecutors that are throwing out cannabis charges, and particularly those that are like less than 20 grams, the misdemeanors, which again is incredible, because we don't want to have issues where people are having that arrest on their record and making it impossible to get employment. But yes, I am seeing discharges come through on people I've bonded out where the state did a no process on it,
Mm-hmm.
meaning they're not going to file any charges.
Yeah,
And,
Chief?
it's a difficult situation too for, I talked about the criminal justice system and how everything works, right? So it's even difficult for us because our detention facility can only house so many inmates, right? So if we're arresting a bunch of people for misdemeanor amounts on a possession of less than 20 charge, then we start to look at, or is the detention facility getting overcrowded? The criminal justice system of the state attorney's office, they have a backlog in cases as well, and so, maybe for them, some of those charges are not important enough, or, to get it off their dockets to not to prosecute those. But, again, like I said, it's still illegal. So if the officer did make that arrest, if they didn't choose to issue a civil citation or notice to appear or what have you, that's not a bad arrest. It's just, like we said, this is a big picture issue, with overcrowding at detention facilities, the case log at the courthouse, and, everything else. So just because that doesn't get prosecuted doesn't mean, that you can't get arrested for it, right? So, but we're seeing society is changing,
Yeah. We actually have a question from a Rosa Robinson, and you guys kind of touched on it a little bit, but I want to pull up her question just to dive a little bit more into, programs within the criminal justice system when it comes to cannabis education. So she asked, what programs does law enforcement have in Florida to assist the community with education of cannabis? Chief, you kind of touched on that a little bit. Do you know if any of your other colleagues around the state and other sheriffs and law enforcement offices actually have programs? Ms. Beebe, are you aware of any programs outside of what you all are seeing? Chief, you mentioned yours. Any others that folks can consider looking into in their communities?
I'm not aware of any. I do know that certain community centers will actually form their own individual programs, some volunteers that come in through social networking and other things to educate the community, and particularly the youth, while they're young, of course, to educate them about the laws as they pertain to, the possession or use of marijuana.
And Mary just hosted an event in Daytona Beach where they actually had law enforcement there to educate the community about cannabis. And this program in itself is an opportunity for those in law enforcement to share information about cannabis. Chief, did you want to weigh in on that? Because you did touch on what you all are doing here in Leon County.
Right. Yeah. Actually, BB hit the nail on the head. Most of our efforts are geared towards the youth, and we have school resource deputies in every school. And, those conversations come up. We have a program called, Back on Track, and we have a Worship with Me program, and, things like that where we're engaging the youth. And those conversations come up, during those encounters with the school resource deputies and the youth. So.
All right. Well, thank you all so much. I can tell you, I've learned so much, listening to you all talk about the consequences of using cannabis illegally in Florida. And before we close the program, I want to know if you all had any closing thoughts or closing comments that you want to share with our listeners and viewers. And Chief, I'll start with you. Any closing comments, thoughts you'd like to share with folks?
Sure. I and this was just we talked about the education, knowing what's legal, what's not illegal, so that we can avoid, criminal behavior, avoid arrests, right? So hopefully today we understood that marijuana is still federally illegal, and it's illegal in the state of Florida without being a registered patient or caregiver in the medical marijuana use registry. And because marijuana can still be illegal, officers or deputies still have a duty to investigate that, right? So like on a traffic stop or what have you. Hopefully people understand today that you cannot drive under the influence. It's dangerous and it is illegal. That you should have your medical marijuana card in your possession, and only use the type of medical marijuana that you were prescribed. Don't have more than the amount that you were prescribed in your possession, and don't remove it from its official packaging that you got from the Medical Marijuana Treatment Center. And one thing that we didn't touch on that maybe people in this community, because we have, several universities in our town, that we get people from out of state.
Yeah.
So one other thing is that Florida does not offer reciprocity with other states, right? So you might have a driver's license and you can drive all over the country and every state will honor that driver's license. But if you have a medical marijuana use card from Oregon and you come to Florida, that we don't recognize that here in Florida. So that's one thing that we didn't talk about during this discussion, but people should probably know that.
That's a very, very good point.
That's great information, especially with spring break coming. It's great information.
All right, Ms. Bibi, any closing thoughts, anything you want to share with our listeners?
I would implore everyone to get involved in the communities, community centers, form groups with the use of social media now. The youth are doing great things with social media in terms of getting together and starting forums where they're educating each other, not just in their particular community or state, but all over the U.S. And I think it would be a great thing. And I challenge not just our youth, but I challenge our youth in particularly to start a group on social media, any social media platform, where you guys are going to educate yourselves and educate each other about the use and possession and the laws of cannabis. Educate.
Okay. Well, thank you both for being guests on our show today, brought to you by the Medical Marijuana Research and Education Initiative at Florida A&M University. Thank you to everyone watching this program. Please tell us what you think about the forum by completing the survey that will be posted in the comment box on YouTube and Facebook after this live program. If you complete the survey, your name will be entered into a drawing on March 10th, 2022 to win a $100 gift card provided by one of Mary's partners. We also want to encourage you to visit the Florida Department of Health's Office of Medical Marijuana Use website, which is knowthefacts.com.org, to learn how to obtain a legal medical marijuana card in the state of Florida. And we also want to encourage you to go to the Florida A&M University Mary website to learn more about this initiative, its educational programs, and additional information about cannabis use. Have a great day, and thanks for watching this show.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.